there's other people's expectations, and that is like the worst toxic thing. So it's like, because everyone in this room has had that friend say, "You should do this," and you're like, "Yeah, I should. You should get on the Tonight Show." You're like, geez, I didn't even think of that. I've been doing stand-up for 8 years and never really... You should get in a Martin Scorsese film. Maybe I should. I haven't really thought about that. I've been just trying to get commercials.
Please welcome Mr. Jim Gaffigan.
This woman has good taste. Let's have a round of applause. I paid her to do that. I only said that I would pay you if you got everyone to stand up, but...
Thank you, everyone, for coming. This is a marvelous movie, and we've had a chance to talk about it a couple of times. But I love talking to Jim about this film because his performance is just so wonderful, and the film is so moving. It's when I see it, I just tear up, and it's like when the lights go on at the end. It's actually I'm kind of like, wait, not yet. Yeah. But I want to ask, like, what went through your mind when you first saw the script for this film?
Yeah, so I got the script, it was pre-vaccine portion of the lockdown, so there was part of me that was like, just get me out of this house. But there was, as an actor, I love the fact that it was an opportunity to play two characters. I like the opportunity to portray someone who was enthusiastic about something that was kind of foreign to me, which is science. I don't really know science. So I loved that opportunity. But I loved how ambitious it was, that it was going to try and tackle a lot of different things and hopefully communicate them. But and then when I talked to Colin, who wrote and directed it, there was an enthusiasm there, and he said that Ray was probably going to do it. So I was like super excited. As if you're going to work with someone like Ray, it's a great opportunity. And so yeah, I was super excited by the opportunity, and I love acting. And selfishly, I thought, if this works on half the points it's attempting to, and other directors will see this, then they can see that I can do this, because I'm convinced that the entertainment industry is completely risk averse, and that we're kind of led to believe that there's this idea that people are going to be discovered in soda shops or whatever. But the reality is people want to hire someone that they know can do it. And so I was excited to show that.
I mean, I feel like you've done a number of dramatic parts over the years. We were talking the other day about, I remember seeing you in Tesla and an Experimenter, oddly enough, science movies. But was dramatic acting something that you'd always wanted to do, or was that something where you sort of consciously chose to branch out at a certain point?
I love all types of acting, but for me, everything's about food. But I feel like with dramas, there's more meat on the bone. There's more complexity to the character, the story. There's a greater likelihood of a subtext and some other stuff going on. I love comedy. It's so fun to do comedy movies and television shows, but I do think that dramatic roles are more fulfilling. And, comedy, you're kind of relieving tension, and drama, you're kind of just sitting in it. But obviously I love comedy, but I love a good dramatic role, and finding a version of me that fits the character is really rewarding.
Yeah, and let's talk about that a little bit, because you mentioned, the challenge of playing two characters appealed to you. Let's talk about it, because is that a case where you have to find some element of yourself in both characters, or?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that's, I'm sure everyone, all these actors, the opportunity to play two characters is really fun, and then you can kind of construct different versions of yourself for each of them. And so with Kent and Cameron, who, like this movie has so many characters Aaron is, Ray, and also Caitlin is also Aaron, and then the older woman is also Aaron. But with Kent and Cameron, that they're actually father and son. And so in constructing that, there is a version of my kind of perception of my father, and also how my kids perceive me. Like my kids think that I'm the most strict person on earth, and and then like Cameron is the vulnerability that he has. I don't think anyone can go through the entertainment industry and not feel like you haven't been shit on a bunch. So, like the fact that all this stuff happens to Cameron, I think just about any actor could identify with that.
But also it feels like, so much of your stand-up is about sort of generational conflict and what your dad was like compared to what you're like, and your kids not understanding you and things like that. I mean, so it's funny to think of this as a departure for you, because in some ways, I mean, when I first saw the film, I thought to myself, I wonder if this was written for Jim Gaffigan, because it feels like it could totally feed into that.
Oh, wow. Yeah. No, well, there is a lot of that generational stuff. And I think anyone who has children, you can't look at how you're parenting without, considering how your parents did it, and how you're probably messing up just as much as they did, and you gain some empathy for your parents going through the parenting process. But the generational thing, and this movie also deals with some generational stuff. It is also kind of blurry, and before we were talking about the pandemic, how, I mean, I really think that the pandemic has done it's kind of flipped the monopoly board. Like there used to be these kind of roles that I think everything's been sped up for kids and also disrupted. So I don't know. I think it's a pretty interesting time.
You mentioned, science wasn't really your thing. Did that require research and preparation for these characters? Were you like binging Bill Nye videos? And
I definitely watched some Bill Nye, and I'd done I'd done Star Talk with Neil deGrasse Tyson, but I was definitely the dumb guy that I think I had a joke about like, if Mars is red, how do we know that's not just blood? I mean, it's just weird things to say. But yeah, so it was a process of not only learning the science, but also gaining an appreciation and an enthusiasm for it, which is kind of foreign to me. That my youngest son really loves science, so I would take that. But I think also anyone who's an actor, you have to have this absurd enthusiasm for the process. So it was very close. So my enthusiasm for attacking the script or talking about comedy or acting is very similar to how Cameron is talking about science.
Tell us a little bit about what it was like to shoot this during the pandemic, because obviously, I mean, part of it was you wanted to get out of the house, so you took this part, but then you probably wound up stuck in a hotel or something.
Yeah, we were in, it's all glamour. We were in like a Best Western. But and it was during the pandemic, pre-vaccine, and there was, there was an expectation. There was no guarantee that we were going to be able to finish it, even, and there was, it's so blurry now, but there was travel restrictions. So I remember Ray Seahorn was going to go home and be with her family during Halloween, and they changed the travel restrictions. So like if she went home, we wouldn't have been able to do the movie because she lives in LA. So she came to our house for Halloween. But there was this, in every indie film, there's this kind of sense of community. But with this, it was kind of much more of, hopefully we'll be able to finish this, because every time there was a test, which has become normal, but it was a huge expense for an indie to add on to a production. So every time there was a test, you were like hoping that, and like I remember we would take turns buying beer for the crew so that they wouldn't go to a bar. We're like, we'll buy beer and put it in the conference room so you guys can drink and hang out. And so, yeah, there was definitely some, but it was a really special group of people that worked on it.
Yeah, actually, I want to ask a little bit more about them. The crew, if this weekend we talked to Colin, the director, a little bit about it, but I find the film to have such a wonderful handmade quality, which really kind of sells the sort of ambitious philosophical ideas behind it. Like even like the costuming choices, like characters are often wearing the same things, but they're different colors. So you don't quite notice it the first time you see it, but then when you see it again, you catch all these little details. You're obviously not the director, but I would love for you to talk a little bit about just the crew and the craftspeople on this film.
Yeah, Colin is definitely the director, Colin West. He had a lot of, and this was reflected in how we worked on the script, because Ray and I we're kind of the type that are obsessing on our characters and backstories, and kind of, I call it doing the math of the script, kind of knowing all the reasoning. But so Colin, because these characters were often the same person in different generations, they did wear some of they all were wearing a cardigan, but he didn't want it to be that noticeable, and so like it would be different shades, but like all of, like I was in a maroon one, and I think the guy who played now I know his last name's Rush, Gabriel, he was in a purple cardigan, and then the older version of me was in like a gray one, but it wasn't like if you end up watching the movie again, you'll notice a couple things that are these things that all make sense. So that while the three different Aarons look pretty different, they all have a similar kind of wardrobe thing. And I should also point out a thing that I think is really interesting is that, the boy who played Sam, there's 5 different versions of Sam. 2 of them were actually my sons, and one of them came to set, ate. He was eating in a scene, and then he went to craft service and he ate all the candy and he threw up in the van. And it was an indie, so, and my wife was, it was an indie, so like the PA was probably like 17. He's like, "What do I do?" And my wife is like, "All right, I'll clean it up." So my wife had to clean up all the vomit. But there's 5 different versions of Sam, so that when you're watching it, and this was all Colin, it was like, you're like, do those kids look similar, or do they? And then, like, you also sit there and you go, wait a minute, did they lose the kid? Maybe that's not important. Maybe it's just a blonde boy. It doesn't matter, right? Yeah. And so, but then it's explained at the end, like we never knew what he looked like. And it's like, you talked about the ending of the movie. I mean, it's really interesting because I have had the opportunity to do a lot of indies, and I've been in some fun movies, but this is the one where people reach out and they're like, you made my husband cry. You know what I mean? Because it's strangely it's poignant, but it's also not saccharine. So, but it's also, I think it's what's so special about it is in this, understandably, we live in this age of cynicism, and I think that we've earned some of that cynicism. But like what I think is so powerful about the movie is that it's the hero of this movie is Erin, who like the most fantastic thing she does is she, is this true life partner that, anyone, I mean, I've gone through a medical crisis with my wife and, I lost my aunt to dementia. It's not an easy gig, you know what I mean? And it's easy to characterize these people as perfect, but like they've made the right decision. And then when you watch it again, there's the scene where Caitlin and Ray are, they're sharing a glass of milk. And she's obviously talking to herself, but Ray says, "You're the most loyal person I know." And that's in some ways what this movie's all about. And that the most fantastic thing, here's something that's really kind of, it's not saccharine though, but like it is kind of this Midwestern value of like, we try and find these incredible, do something fantastic. But the reality is like if you can pull off an intimate relationship, it doesn't matter the length of time. That's pretty fantastic, given how weird we are, right?
I want to ask, you've talked about how obsessive you can be as an actor. Were you always that way? Like when you were starting off, like even just trying to find parts, were you always kind of obsessive in that way?
Yeah, I think that it's even my comedy. I'm very much trying to write and rewrite. And granted, half my jokes are about diarrhea, but it is kind of like rewriting. I'm like, how do I make this more perfect? But some of it is just, I mean, what I love about acting and what everyone in this room loves about acting is that some of it is you're finding out in the scene, in that moment, what's happening. But I do also think that preparation is what gives me a level of peace in being able to go along with the flow in the scene. And maybe some of that's just quelling nerves, but it's also, I call it the math of the scene, but it is really rewarding to kind of know where you are and do service to, the moments in the scene. And it's the opposite of stand-up. Stand-up, you go up there, you're the writer, director, and you're doing it all. But it is fun to be this piece in this, where the hero is the moment.
Yeah.
So,
I read an interview with you, or maybe I heard the interview, I don't remember, but when you were talking about how you were, of a lot of the people you knew early on, you were the one who held on to his day job the longest. I always loved that story, and it always felt very relatable. But I'm curious, like, what was it that kind of just kept you going?
Well, I mean, I grew up in, I didn't know anyone. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, and I didn't know anyone in the entertainment industry. I mean, outside of the marching band, like there was the marching band. I didn't play an instrument. So the pursuit, and I was raised in, my parents had gone through the Depression and World War II, and my family had been my father's family had been in the country for like 6 generations, and we'd finally gotten to the upper middle class. So the notion of success was wearing a coat and tie. And I think there was the remnants of that. Show people are kind of like people that work in the circus, And so there was no security. Like my dad, I ended up working in advertising, and he was like, that's not very reliable at all. And of course, I'm the youngest of 6 kids, and my occupation ended up being far more secure than the ones that worked in banking. They all ended up getting laid off at different times. So,
when you started pursuing a career in showbiz, how did you define success then?
Oh yeah, that's what's so confusing is like they never tell you there's other people's expectations, and that is like the worst toxic thing. So it's like, because everyone in this room has had that friend say, you should do this, and you're like, yeah, I should. You should get on the Tonight Show. You're like, geez, I didn't even think of that. I've been doing stand-up for 8 years and never really. You should get in a Martin Scorsese film. Maybe I should. I haven't really thought about that. I've been just trying to get commercials. And so... but my point about like getting caught up in other people's expectations is, for me personally, I and some of it is reflected in some of the jobs that I've chosen to do, is that it's for me success is fulfilling. I'm not saying I don't have an ego, that like I don't like getting a Grammy nomination. I mean, I like that, but I also know that doing some of that work on the script is really what it's about. And when I do, there's so many slaps in the face in this industry that you have to enjoy the process, or you're not going to be able to put up with the humiliation. So it is I have to keep relearning that the success is the opportunity to do it.
Yeah.
And not even, because I think sometimes people are like, you could get so much money just doing things that you don't want to do. And you're like, well, why didn't I just become an investment banker if I just wanted money? You know what I mean?
It's funny. A few months ago, I had the chance to talk to the guys at Broken Lizard, with whom you've done several films, and you were in the movie Super Troopers, which was relatively early in their career, relatively early in your career, and Kevin Heffernan, who's a member of that group. He talked about how back then he didn't want to let you have that part in Super Troopers because you and he were always up for the same parts in auditions, and you would get them and he wouldn't, and he was just like, there's no way I'm letting Jim Gaffigan be in my fucking movie.
It's so fun. That Super Troopers is so weird because I did audition for a bigger part, and we, that was when you could make a living just doing commercials. So like that was a big thing. But Super Troopers, I'm not exaggerating, I worked on that movie for maybe 2 hours. And it was, it's like your son might not know Super Troopers, but like there's a whole generation of, probably 25 to 35 where Super Troopers, that, I was like, oh, so they would just be so into that meow thing, and they'd be like, so what are those guys like? And I'm like, wow, I was on set for like 2 hours. They seemed great. But it's weird how like you can do all these other things, and then, you work for a couple hours on something, and then it just explodes.
And you came back for the sequel. This is not going to turn into a Super Troopers Q&A, I promise. I just found that fascinating because of we're talking about how you define success, because in his eyes back then you were the guy who was getting all the parts,
And of course, I spent probably 8 years doing commercials and trying to segue into getting a legit agent, and they were, they just kind of were like very polite, and they're like, thank you for the commercial money, we'll talk to you next year. And so it's just, and then there's like then you get your Law and Order episode, and then I had one line on Spin City, and it's an insane pursuit. We're lunatics, that, right? right?
Was there ever a point where you felt like not so much that you could relax, but you felt like you'd arrived at a good place, or is a certain level of just anxiety just a part of the profile?
I mean, I would say, I mean, I enjoy. I love working. Like in an ideal situation, like there was a time where I worked on this movie that ended up being called Chuck, I think. But I worked on that, and then I did 2 shows that night. And I was like, that's what I want to do. But the reality is that I have 5 children. And so I have to, I mean, I don't want to completely suck at that. You know what I mean? I know I'm, so it is an ongoing, I have to reevaluate every couple months and go, all right. And there's decisions, and thankfully my wife is from the business, knows the business, but it is kind of like every now and then she's like, you don't have to do this one. And so there is an ongoing negotiation, but otherwise I would just, but like everyone knows Betty White, she supposedly never turned down a job. You know what I mean? Now it sounds like I know Betty White.
Your daddy's in the audience tonight.
Oh, all right. There you go.
Roger Simon.
Oh, Roger, I didn't see you, Roger. Oh my gosh. There he is.
He's Jim, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We have to get Jim out to another appointment, so if everybody could remain seated while we,
Thanks, you guys.
You can stand up
And Roger will deal with some questions. Thanks so much. Thank you. Thanks so much. Peace.